Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed your lunch. Welcome again to Terra 2024. We did open the blinds here, so if anyone gets too hot during the session, please just let us know and we'll get these closed. We'll next take a second to review the land acknowledgement statement. Oh, there we go. I'll give you all a second to read that. And this session will be Hot Topics and Pre-Award, Building Bridges Through People and Processes, led by Sarah Gates from ASU and Sherry Boyd-Grossman, also from ASU. And I'll hand this over and let you guys.
Oh, thank you. All right, yes, I am Sarah Gates from ASU. I started as an RA in what was then the Department of Sociology, and then moved to our central office in 2011, where I have mostly operated as a grant contract officer for pre-award, and am now, yes, hello everybody in Zoom, I'm sorry that you cannot see my lovely face. And now I lead the proposal functional group, which is with the proposals and negotiation team. And of course, we do the review of proposals for compliance. We support the RA community in preparing those proposals, making sure that they're all fit to be submitted. And of course, then we authorize and submit those proposals to our sponsors. I'll pass it on to Sherry.
Hello, I am ASU through and through. I got my bachelor's degree there. I got my master's degree there. Just like everybody else, I sort of fell into this field. I actually started as a student worker in business operations some time ago. And then I found out I was doing research administration and kind of concentrated on that. So I support departments that don't have their own RA team. They're in social sciences. It's a relatively small unit. And we're educating our faculty on how to do grants the ASU way. You know, we can look at a solicitation and things like that, but we also want to school you on timelines and things like that. Okay, so our agenda. The bridge is the most important thing. This, if I could put this bridge on every single slide, I would do it. But thankfully we have Sarah as an editor. So this is sort of how I picture building the bridge. There's, you know, that straight line that we think of from the sponsor to the PI, but along the way, there's things that need to be done that are crucial and that sometimes get looked over, but are the really, you know, the key parts of building that bridge. So we're going to talk about that through a couple of policy updates. Probably you've already heard about it, but we'll talk about how we implemented them. And the same thing for systems updates and technology updates. All right.
Yeah. So again, we are going to talk a little bit about those policy updates, but really the sample that we're providing here is meant to be an opportunity for us to engage in conversation and talk about, you know, who are the people that we need, what is the support that we need, what is the education and the outreach that we need to conduct in order to make sure that we're staying ahead of these pre-award developments, which are happening constantly, right? And then we'll get a chance at the end to talk about any hot topics that you'd like to bring to the table, as well as any questions that you have for us. All right, so we'll jump right in and start with policy updates. And what better to start with than the PAPP, right? Just at the end of last year, they started announcing that there would be changes forthcoming for the 24-1. Of course, this is the proposal and award policies and procedures guide. That is going to go into effect this May 20th. You can see here. This details, of course, NSF's proposal preparation and submission guidelines. It also sets the policies and procedures for award monitoring and administration. We are going to have at the end of this presentation a comprehensive list of the external sources that we are talking about today for your reference, but here you can see the announcement along with the link that was provided to arrive at that announcement. So how do we prepare for policy updates in the central office and using this PAPBG update as an example. So usually once the announcement is made, identifying the forthcoming updates, and we'll alert the RA community of any sponsor information that's available, any webinar opportunities that become available. And we have a dedicated channel. We use Microsoft Teams for the RA community, and we actually have one for pre-award and post-award. So we try to get the information out as quickly and as often as possible so that everybody has the opportunity to get that information sponsored. Then usually the pre-award associated director will enlist officers and administrators at the ASU central office to review the updates and changes to see what is going to impact us, right, for the proposal preparation and submission process. So as mentioned, this initial draft for the PAPPG was released in, I believe, the fall of last year. And at that time, we did meet to investigate what kind of changes may be in store, if we needed to collaborate any further on anything big that may be happening. And we did. There are a few there, and we'll get to one of those a little bit later. Once the final version was released, we took a look, we saw what stuck, essentially what they ended up in that final version, and of those changes, what action we needed to do in order to make sure that our PIs in our institution remain compliant. So here's an example of that change review and impact Excel that was created and then continued to be built upon in order to see what we needed to do. Basically, each of these items was assigned to a specific officer and an administrator who was then responsible to identify any procedural changes that we needed to do. That's institutional changes that we needed to attend to. We're still working on some of these, of course, but once the comprehensive list is complete, we've identified what we need to do, and in some cases, we've already made these announcements. We then alert the RA team about the changes and anything that they need to prepare their PIs for moving forward in anticipation of this change for the new deadline.
I just want to jump in here really quick and just say that taking the time to go to the webinar sessions with Gene Feldman is worth it. Every single time I learn something new or I hear something that clicks different. But the best part is the Q&A. I've learned a lot from the community and what they're asking too. So make sure you take the time to do that.
We may be coming back on these slides, so we're on that. All right, so we're gonna, yeah, I think this may be a version of our slides for those at home that is maybe outdated, but we'll figure it out, right? Okay, you will not be missing any critical information, I promise. Okay. Tribal partnerships. So this is one of those big ones that we identified in the draft of the PAPG 24-30 release. Here you have it described. This is seeking and obtaining tribal nation approval for proposals that may impact tribal resources or interests. It requires that those proposals include a copy of the written request to any of those impacted tribal nations. At proposal time, this request is required. So you can see why we needed to make sure to get ahead of this, right? Because that is going to be a required element for those proposals that have that impact. Then, of course, if it is awarded, NSF is going to require that approval. Per NSF, projects that do not have that prior written approval from the officials designated at the relevant tribal nations will not be awarded by NSF. So, again, we flagged this for attention very early on. We began meeting in November of last year. These were organized by our pre-award leadership. It included representatives from ASU's Office of Research Integrity and Assurance, Research Advancement Services, and the Proposals and Negotiation team. A plan was put in place to engage leadership with ASU's Office of American Indian Initiatives. And this communication remains active. We have in place a statement of commitment to tribal nations and a special advisor to the President of American Indian Affairs. This special advisor is the one that fosters and develops the relationships with the tribal nations and members on behalf of the university, and was absolutely key in driving ASU's approach to this new NSF policy. So here is essentially the process that we ultimately arrived at. We, you know, really drive home the fact that the PI and the project team need to thoroughly review the institutional guidance that's available, and further very much need to jump ahead of any proposal requirements. They need to start reaching out to our Indigenous research to communicate their desire to work with a tribal nation. They can work with that team to start developing that relationship with a nation that may be interested. We emphasize the fact that this will take time. It's not going to take into account any proposal deadlines, right? This relationship building. And further, that the reasons for working with this tribe need to extend beyond the particular funding opportunity and should be rooted in the tribe's interests, right? That's very critical. So you can see here, essentially, this is a summary of what we published to the RA community to identify what our process will be. This is how we arrived to the point in which we can ultimately supply that written request that is delivered to the tribal nation so that we can be compliant with those proposals in research.gov. And then ultimately, of course, if it's selected for funding, the PI needs to re-engage with Indigenous research, start working on getting that approval. And of course, throughout the whole time of this, that relationship.
I think they're in my left draft order. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the Malign Foreign Talent Recruitment Program, and I just want to say again, this is about building bridges, like how we do things to comply. I'm not here to teach you. This is not like, this is official information. It's dense, so I'm not going to read everything on the slide, but I wanted to highlight it because it was something that really got highlighted at the NSF webinar. And it's another one of those things that has to be certified. So it's been added to the biosketch and the current pending support. So a couple of definitions. Each covered individual is listed on the Research and Development Award, and they must certify that they are not a part of a malign foreign talent recruitment program. And this is the and, it's not or, and they have to certify that their institution informed them of this requirement. There's a covered individual. It's pretty self-explanatory, the folks working on it. The question that got asked the most was foreign country of concern. Who is that? It means the People's Republic of China, North Korea, Russia, and Iran. And then any other country deemed to be a country of concern, but that's the list for now. This defines what a malign foreign talent recruitment program is. And I think we all have a sense of that. We all know that, you know, all of the policies that have been put into place and protecting intellectual property, et cetera, we're careful of those. So what we wanted to ask is, what sponsor policies have impacted you all the most? What's your hot topic? How did your team implement, educate? What was your successes, and where do you feel like you could maybe improve? Zoom, folks online, raise your hand or chat.
One of the things we keep dealing with is all the changes to biosketches and current pending by NSF, and there's another one coming up. Hello. One of the things that we've been dealing with is the multiple changes over the last few years of biosketches and current and pending for NSF. Not so much on our end and trying to learn them, but continually to get the PIs to update and revise and continue to do that. And hopefully this new change is going to be one that sticks for a while. I don't know if your group has heard anything differently, if there's going to be something else coming down, if this is a temporary fix, but we're hopeful that this is going to be something that's going to stick for a while. But I know that's been an issue with us and trying to get the PIs to continually update and revise and learn a new way to do it.
Thank you. Anybody else? Online? Oh, they seconded, yes. Anybody else want to share? So thank you for mentioning that. We're actually going to talk about the updates to BioSketch and current and pending a little bit later. What I wanted to do was show you, you know, it's time consuming to go through all of these updates, to put together all of the things that we do. And really on the end of it, what do we get? We get an angry PI, yay. So we can take the time. We're used to sitting through, pulling apart documents, making sure that we're compliant with the solicitation, doing all of those things. But we're still gonna have to do that work of informing the PI and, you know, smoothing the way for these changes. One of the ways that I do that is through a task table. I don't think this is new to anybody. I'm sure everybody has their own version of it. But this is one of the first ways that I interact with the PI. We have a meeting and we go over the task table. You're a lead of this, I'm lead of that. And then we have sort of a system of red, yellow, and green. Where are we at in the project? I had a colleague of mine develop a timetable estimator. And so this is it's just a Google Sheets tool. But what it did was we built in best case timelines. And so the grant seeking timeline and process, this is part of what we're trying to educate the faculty on. Like I said, in social sciences, they're not as socialized to grant writing and to federal sponsors as anybody in the natural sciences might be. And so we are shocking people when we say, you know, 6 months is not too early to reach out. That's actually ideal. We would love to hear from you 6 months out. How often does it happen? For the kinds of projects I work on, not very often. Hopefully in the central office, things like I heard Val talking about, they really need longer. They must have longer. But this is sort of where we think about it, and we tell them where we're going to get involved, what they can be doing in the meantime, and what they should be thinking about. So that timetable estimator, we plug in the due date. This is not the sponsor due date. This is the internal due date for the PI, not the central deadline, right? We have 3 deadlines. We have the unit, we have central, and we have sponsor. This tells us, you can see, create the proposal in ERA. For a July proposal, it wanted this done March 17th. You can all laugh now. What it does is it's building in accountability for ourselves, but also the PI. It's really helping to communicate, you know, what is going to take them time, how long they should be working on it, and when in the project development should they be thinking about it. This is also really good because it can be something that you go back to, and maybe the date completed gives you a hint on something. Maybe you add a note that actually this took 3 months to accomplish and not 2 weeks. So you can start to build up the estimator more and more as you use it. Oh, okay. Back to there.
All right. Okay, so we're still in policy updates. And again, what a nice big one, but uniform guidance. Can you believe it's been a decade since we first had this roll out? So yes, late last year, Office of Management and Budget, OMB, published proposed changes to uniform guidance, otherwise known as 2 CFR 200. This, of course, originally went into effect 2014, if you can remember that. Before then, all of the regulations for federal grants were cobbled together in different OMB circulars for the different federal agencies. So this went ahead and streamlined those, and as is the case this time, they're interested in reducing administrative burden, basically. They're also providing some clarity in language and updating some of the terminology as well. The proposed changes were published in October in the Federal Register, and then that started a 60-day comment period. And wouldn't you know it, just a couple of weeks ago on April 4th, the updates were released online in a pre-publication version. So the effective date for Uniform Guidance 2024 is October 1st. Federal agencies may actually elect to implement this prior to that date, but cannot do so any sooner than 60 days after the formal publication rather in the Federal Registrar. So I mentioned that because so each agency must implement the guidance right through their codified regulations for it to apply to the agency's recipients or subrecipients, that's us as the institution, to encourage uniformity and consistency. They are adopted to use uniform guidance unless it's prohibited by some federal statute, or they get something, some sort of deviation approved by the OMB. Because of this flexibility to implement the revised guidance before October 1st, there may be different effective dates. So while the intention, of course, is to create uniformity, we may see it roll out among the federal agencies at different dates, but by October 1st. So what are those changes that we can expect? This is just a summary. There are quite a few of them. And again, we'll have external links at the end for those that want to dig in a little bit more. I'll let you take a look here. One of the important things to note is that for those items, and we'll talk about budgeting in a second, right? And so let me go through that. Okay. Those threshold items that are going to affect your modified total direct costs, and they will affect your modified total direct costs, those do not come into play into your proposal budgets until it is in your negotiated indirect cost rate agreement. So important to note, even though these are going to roll out in October, these changes to the threshold specifically for equipment and subrecipients, they need to appear in your agreement before you can start implementing them into your actual proposals. So as mentioned, there are a number of changes that are coming through this uniform guidance update. Our fiscal oversight team is working on reviewing those updates and are preparing to post a summary for our sponsored projects in the research administration community. As with any policy change, we need to implement internal systems to adjust for these changes. What comes to mind is our budget software that we use, and we'll talk a little bit about our internal systems in a second. How to distribute notices, of course, across the research administration community to provide for enough lead time to prepare for these changes, and of course, a clear explanation of the expectations, right, that these changes are going to bring about, as well as any updates to our institutional tools. So among all of that, and as a primary duty of my team, we also need to make sure that our grant and contract officers are well aware of this, because especially in a time of transition, you want to basically rid yourself of the habit of relying on your experience and your repeated review, and actually be mindful of the fact that things are changing, and we need to make sure that we're adopting that in our review so that we do that appropriately. All right, so speaking of budget impacts, Sherry's going to talk a little bit about what that's going to look like for the IRA. What's that?
Did the slide make it in?
Let's see. It
Nope.
did not.
Okay.
Imagine, if you will, a budget.
Imagine, if you will, an ERA budget. Those at ASU know what it looks like. This is just one highlight of, again, building that bridge between what the sponsor is telling us, what they're changing, and the impacts on the PIs. So I'm sure you've all heard some mumbling, at least, about the indirect cost rate. At least at ASU, ours is 57%, and that tends to knock people out. Again, especially for social sciences, because they have no idea that could even be a thing. So I did develop a budget impacts thing, and I will make sure that the slide gets to you. That's the right slide. But what I want to tell you, and actually I'm just gonna walk around and show you all. What I want to tell you all is what the the differences. So you can all hopefully see this, okay? The biggest difference when we're talking about subawards, that threshold change of 25,000 to 50,000 is going to be a huge, huge change. And from the PI's perspective, they're going to see an increase in their budget by $14,000. $14,000 when they're already bulking at the FNA rate. This is the conversation we need to be prepared to have, and having that as we're doing budgeting, hopefully 6 months out. So again, we want to hear from you all. What uniform guidance updates do you think will impact you? What do you anticipate you're going to do to communicate and educate? And for any of you that were here when the last update happened a decade ago, what'd you learn? Please, anybody? Yay! Sarah.
Sure. Hi, I'm Sarah Kern. I am with our fiscal oversight post-award team. So I help to oversee our CFA submission or single audit, respond to other audits. And I'm also helping to lead the team of reviewing uniform guidance. So great job, Sarah, with the list. I'm probably going to steal your slide a little bit. So some of the links that you guys will get is it's 600, the pre-publication guide is 600 pages, 200 of which is a description from the feds of all of the feedback they took into consideration in a summary of their changes. And then the rest of the 400 pages is the actual guide. Most of the changes are just extremely positive for us as institutions. Hopefully some of you got to attend the uniform guidance launch hosted by the White House over Zoom. It was like 6,000 people, I think, were on Zoom. It was insane. The prep to this celebration was about how this was going to radically change the landscape. And as a research administrator, I was like, what? I've looked at these proposed changes and there's nothing super radical. But what it is, it's radical for the agencies. So the increased requirements, and especially requirements for simplifying the funding announcements, are going to change a lot for. So it's really the feds are the most impacted as far as the work that's going to be required. So for us at ASU, the biggest challenge is that we just spent 3 years working on our FNA rate proposal. We submitted it in August. I got to do that with my colleagues. That was really fun. And so, and we haven't heard back because we're with the San Francisco office for our cognizant agency. And up until a couple months ago, they had lost everybody. So there was no one there to review our rate proposal. So I think they just hired somebody, but there's a lot of people in the queue. So for us, it could be 3 years based on what our peers are experiencing before they even start talking to us about negotiating the rate agreement. And then it could be another year. So for us being able to implement the potential increases to capital equipment thresholds, which that would require a lot of conversation at the university as a whole. We can't make that decision alone, but especially the increase. So on the central side, we're like, yay to the increase for the base for subawards. While we can control that, we have to have an approved rate agreement. And so based on where we're going, we would not have an approved rate agreement that would contain this until our next round, which could be approved in 8 years. So right now we're looking at it and doing a financial analysis to say, do I need to go back to our rate proposal, pull it back, restart the timeline, do a bunch of edits, review that whole thing over again, and resubmit? So those are decisions we're working on making in the next few weeks. That's our biggest impact.
Thank you so much. Anybody else?
Just have a question for you about how you have found it best to communicate this out into your institution. As I'm like rolling through the Rolodex of really some basic things here that we do, but then it ends up being down to the PRAs to then talk case by case in detail. I'm like, that's really time consuming for them. So your experience on that would be great.
You want to speak to the central first?
Sure, yes. And in fact, I think our surprise guest speaker, Sarah Kern, did a good job actually of talking about just all the time and legwork that goes into not only reviewing, but identifying what it is that's going to happen for our institution and reflection of everything. So I think back, so I was around in the 2014 rollout, and I just remember it being a massive undertaking where there were just, I mean, we started having meetings on it like months out, like, you know, central office wide meetings essentially to start getting people's gears running, I think, and trying to both acknowledge and accept the fact that these changes were coming, right? I would say for the most part, they were all very positive changes for us. And I think that is the intention is to be the same. I know Sarah talked about the funding announcements for the agencies, but they're really trying to simplify things for the recipients, which is lovely. But I think essentially in terms of how are we approaching this, it's just communicate, communicate, communicate. And then we really do, as you mentioned, rely on our research administrators essentially to work with the PIs through the particularities that are now going to come up with those proposals. And so we try at the central office to be as transparent and essentially as available as possible so that when weird things come up, we can make that decision based on our experience and our knowledge of the changes. Oh, sorry, Sarah?
So some examples of what Sarah's talking about is that when we had the revisions, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago to uniform guidance. My team actually published charts of here's what the guidance was before, here's what it changed to, here's the impact, here are the policies. One of my staff members managed a lot of that and did a really good job. So we actually posted that on a public blog that we have for research administration. And then, so we're gonna do a similar thing of like, all right, everyone, here is like what the impacts are and what we're anticipating the changes are going to be to our internal processes. And then we also have a dedicated team site that both our central and department post-award and pre-award folks utilize. So we'll be able to post there, and that will allow live conversations to be happening, and that the questions that one department is asking about implications, everyone else can see, and we're not having to just keep re-answer the question for 100 separate people.
That's an excellent point. Thank you.
You have something online that just says the ability for portion of each sub-award is so important for being able to administer sub-awards with all of the increasing complexity.
Agreed 100%. Because what are we talking about? We're talking about us. We're talking about indirect costs. We're talking about people that you can't assign to a specific project, but we need to be funded. We need to have the infrastructure. So it is a great thing for the institution, but communicating it to the PI does most of the time come down to one-on-one basis. And so that's why we start, even though Sarah's very optimistic with her timeline, even though it might be 8 years away, that's a blink of an eye if you're already involved in a 5-year project and writing for your next project. And hopefully you are, and hopefully you're talking to your RA. But what we try to do is we make sure that all of the information that Central shares with us gets down into the nooks and crannies of ASU. So even folks that don't have an RA job title, we make sure those folks that are related to sponsored projects in some way, we make sure they get the information. And then again, communicating one-on-one with the PI, and that's one of the reasons that we want that long proposal development and why we're educating to it.
And thank you to those online who have chimed in, and thank you, Nick, for the great question. That's really good. All right, so now we're going to go on to system updates. Research administration, of course, as you all are well aware, are tasked with keeping ahead of these system updates and software updates, both internal and external, and we'll have examples of both. It's especially important for us in pre-award because it's essentially the way in which we meet deadlines. It also ensures that we're providing the correct institutional and budget information, right? All right, so our two examples that do not appear here are going to be our internal ERA system, which I'll get to in a second, and then we'll talk about some of authentication issues on external sites. Oh, here we go. Ta-da. Okay, so internal systems. The example that I'm using here is a platform that ASU uses called Enterprise Research Administration, or ERA, as we refer to it in short. It's essentially software that we use across the grant cycle for all sponsored projects administration. It includes management of the awards, as well as research integrity and assurance, in addition to the development and submission of proposals, which is the little bit of the action that we're involved in. So in terms of updating or staying ahead of internal system changes, what I've provided here is an example for the NIH forms change. And wouldn't you know it, they are coming. Just a couple of weeks ago, NIH announced that the NIH forms I are going to be implemented for due dates on January 25th, 2025. That announcement identifies where those key changes are going to be. It includes mostly PHS 398 forms, research training and program plan, assignment request form, fellowship supplemental form, and the cover page supplemental form. So I mention it here because we work in a system to system software system where we can actually prepare grants, many grants.gov applications in ERA. And when those new forms roll out, we have to make sure that those forms are adopted in our system as well, so that we can not only prepare them, but get them out on time. So here is a sample of our scheduling for that. And you can see it starts essentially as soon as we can. You know, when they make the announcement, we have an ERA development team that we start to engage early on that. So we get them out there. We start testing with members of our research administration crew, as well as our proposals and negotiation team. And then once we try to work out the bugs, we start to alert what our timeline is going to look like so that the RAs can be prepared essentially for any workarounds or any disruptions in the schedule, which of course we try to avoid if at all possible. We haven't always made it out ahead of the changes. There have been times where we've been so close that we've actually encouraged the RAs to work through grants.gov or assist rather than using system to system, because of course, January 25th is just what, a couple of weeks ahead, the big early February deadline that we have for the R01s in NIH. So, but hopefully with Forms 8 or I, having been well practiced now and rolling it out, we'll be ready to go. And then we have external systems. So sponsor portal updates, they happen constantly. And in this particular example that I'm sharing here, we're talking about authentication systems. And of course, we had a lot of our federal agencies move to login.gov recently. Portal changes are happening so often now. We actually have a standing agenda with my team in the proposal functional group to talk about any issues we're having, to talk about access, talk about updates that we need to be aware of so that we are adjusting either our roles or our access in such a way that there's no disruption come deadline. We in the central office maintain a database that identifies all of our sponsor portals, login information, should it be institutional, or at least the identities of those that can access it, or who to contact if you do need access. Val Keim, who's joining us here, is actually initiated an update to what we refer to as eViz that is still ongoing. This is how massive that database is we are still refining it in a way so that it speaks clearly and efficiently to those who need to use it, because again, it is a really critical part of what we do, since we are essentially all electronic with those small handful of exceptions, like the state government who still has mail-in proposals. Okay, so what I wanted to talk about really quickly here, and we are still working on a resolution, is SAM's Domestic, and that's the system used by the Department of State. So they switched to a login system that is not login.gov. I'm going to pronounce it OKTA, OKTA, okay? I'm getting some nods. It's OKTA verification process, and they sent out some alerts essentially saying, if you can't download this on your phone, or let's say you don't have a smartphone, you're not getting it. So we were able to get ahead of that. Luckily, we were all able to download the software, get set up for that. But what we did come to discover is that only one person can have access to the institutional account. That is, we have an institutional account, maintain an institutional account, have submitted proposals through that institutional account, but it will only be accessible through one person's cell phone at a time. Okay. Luckily, we were able to each individually get through into the system. And so far, it does look like we can see what we need to. But again, the issue is all of the collective, the repository of what we've submitted and what we would have submitted in the future would have been through that institutional account. And now only one person can get into it. Our workaround in our last iteration was actually to work with the technical help desk to have them switch to another person so that that person could make a deadline. But it's still in process. We're still trying to figure out how to get through it. So that we, again, don't miss any deadlines, and alternatively, so that our AMT folks can get to the awards and process those awards on time. So yeah, that's still a learning process. So when we prompt for audience discussion, I would love to hear if any of you guys are struggling with that as well. But for now, we will move on to some other system updates. Oh, sure. Oh, excuse me, award management team. That is our post-award officers. Thank you for the question.
We all have our own alphabet soup, right?
Another point.
Okay, so let's talk about impact. So what Sarah just described is probably, the old school version of what it looked like, but this is how it feels when things like this comes out. And again, talking about the impact, there's going to be that change management area. We heard it as the Valley of Despair at ASU when we were going through our financial management system implementation. So there is going to be a little bit of uptake and convincing and things like that. So one of those things is going to be Science EB. This is the big thing that I think is going to create stumbling blocks for my PIs. We all know that since October, the biosketch and the current and pending must be generated through Science EB, must be generated by the PI, but they've changed the requirements now. So the biosketch is no longer a page limit. You can include what you need to include. They've removed synergistic activities from the biosketch and made it a separate attachment. You still have to do it. You still have to offer it, but it's a separate attachment now. And it does have a page limit. You can still only have 5 examples, but it has to fit on 1 page. And that was that. Jean went back to that over and over again. Up to 5 examples, 1 page limit. Whatever you can fit, that's what you get. For Science EB, the slide that's missing, there is an option for a delegate. And that I think is really crucial to have, especially for PIs that are really active and going through the process a lot. That process gives us the ability to go in and sort of get started or edit or get things ready for the PI like we probably would have with the fillable PDFs. But it's a great thing, but we need to still communicate to the PI. They must generate it. They must certify it. And so one of the things that they're going to be certifying on that biosketch, a change to it, is the Malign Foreign Recruitment Talent Program. So you're going to have to be, the faculty are going to have to be acknowledging that they are not, they certify they are not, and they're certifying that the institution informed them of this policy, and they certify that. So it's going to be another certification only the PI can do, and only the PI can generate it. There was a change to something else, but I'm blanking. So you mentioned this earlier, the biosketch and the current and pending. We got a comment online about the current and pending. So what are you all experiencing? Is Science TV your friend yet? Is it PI's friends? Yeah, I'm seeing a little this. Yeah. So for us, again, the communication and education, we're talking about it as much as we possibly can. We're offering as much information as we can, as soon as we possibly can in the process. And so we do that in different ways, and we'll talk about that in the Q&A. So excited.
Very excited. We'll move quickly. I think we'll probably AI pretty quickly here because that's the most exciting. But I wanted to go back to the audience really quickly just to see if there was anything else. I wanted to briefly touch those common forms. It is exciting if we really get federal agencies to adopt that, so that not only are they consistent, but we're bringing PIs on board and they can start to implement these forms across agencies. That's incredible, right? I mean, we don't need to be creating different current and pendings for DODs that have, I was talking to a colleague about this, that have the address of the agency and everything, like if we can get it so that it's a living record as things are updated, that's wonderful. And ultimately will be much more efficient, I think, for all involved. It's just, of course, we're in that transition period where people are having to change and it's not entirely consistent yet. So we'll see what happens there. And then, yeah, was there any comments? I do want to touch back just in case with portal updates, internal updates. Yes, sorry, 1 second.
So, hi, I'm Erin from the University of Arizona, and I support a department that's primarily NSF funded. And I just wanted to comment about the biggest challenge with Science TV is when you have a large grant with many PIs and there are late budget changes, maybe it's being reviewed by your central office and there's an adjustment, everybody has to go adjust their total, recertify. And that's the biggest challenge I've found so far.
That's an excellent point.
Around. My sense of the webinar with Jean is that this project has been going on. We've all heard about this Common Forms project, but it's now getting to the implementation stage. And so they are still making changes. Obviously, like the bio sketch is the biggest change. But I lost my train. I don't think but is where I was going with that, actually. My point was that it seems like to me that they are getting to a steady ground, especially with the requirements the way that they are now. I think, the way that they first rolled out, going from the fillable PDF to the Science CV and doing all those things, that was the change that we had to get through. But I am hopeful, and I hope very much that it's going to stay relatively the same.
Thanks, guys. Okay, technology updates. I'm going to move through this part pretty quickly because it's not so much, I'm sorry. You can laugh briefly. We're going to talk about that, AI. All right, so data security. Again, not hot as in new. We've been dealing with this for years and years now, but hot as in maybe ever present and something that we have to kind of diligently keep ahead of. Essentially, if there's any kind of mention of data security at the pre-award stage, we engage the pre-award team, our grant contract officers, pretty quickly on that to make sure that we're prepared to deal with it. There are a lot of keywords that we look for. FARS clause, DFARS clause, which is identified here on the slide. Anything that talks about a data security plan, anything that talks about controlled and classified information, CUI. We keep an eye out for this because it is very important that we first identify if it's necessary, right? And if so, identify what we need to do in order to prepare for it. And in that preparation, what we're essentially talking about, or what I am identifying here with this example, is budget preparation, right? We want to make sure that we have budgeted in our proposal funds to support additional security, data security management for that. So I will share along with the slides some more information on this instead of talking through it now, since we are a little short on time. But essentially what we advise are, or include potentially into the proposal itself is that because it's fundamental research, if it is in fact fundamental research, which it often is, that we don't expect that there will be any classified or unclassified controlled data or information, and that NIST would therefore not apply those NIST requirements. However, should they be imposed, please be aware that data storage security, those costs are going to be required. And so we basically reserve the right to update our budget should that be the case. I have not personally seen if this has worked at the negotiation stage, if we've been able then to retroactively include those costs, but we're trying to, again, get ahead as much as we can to identify that those costs will be necessary if there are going to be additional security measures in place. All right. Artificial intelligence.
Okay, so this for me is an actual hot topic. Okay, so there's in Terra AI series. If you're part of Terra, you see the YouTube Tuesdays come out. There's a series on AI. There's short little videos, but altogether it's less than 30 minutes. So if you want to take the time, I would recommend that. And what they talk about is the impact on research administration and research administrators. What I want to tell you is that ASU is sort of a thought leader in this area. They signed a contract with OpenAI, who owns ChatGPT, and they're thinking through how AI can be used in all kinds of different ways. So one of the examples was like the task table that I showed you earlier. My hope is that one day I can ask something to build me a task table based on this solicitation, and it will just give me that. That would save so much time, right? But we still need the human factor. I'm still going to need to double check that. I'm still going to want to make sure that all of those requirements are in there. And then as it gets programmed or learns better, whatever, I think that will be really useful, and I think it will save time. So I'm not a user of AI. I said to my boss, maybe I'm using AI. I'm not even sure, really. So this is really a hot topic. And when we thought about hot topics for this session, we thought, well, what's hot for us may not be hot for you all. And so we wanted to talk about that, and especially AI and how you see that affecting research administration. So we see it as efficiency. Definitely, it's going to streamline processes. We do not think it's going to replace the humans. I'm big on that, obviously. So it's something that we are thinking about. There's some examples in the AI series about how you can use that. And I think yes. What are you all doing? What do you know about AI? What have you used it for? Has anybody used it? Sarah, I saw your hand.
It's funny cost share poems for like new hires. It's
This is Howard from Arizona State. Just talking about AI, I do not use it, but I know in so many sessions and training things that we've been in and meetings and seminars, it is such a hot topic. I think even for those of us that are kind of staying away from it and in the background on it, I think we're going to have to all learn about it and how it's used, at least, so that we can understand, because clearly, at least from what I've observed, everybody else is starting to use it. So it's just.
Yeah, so Val Keim from ASU. One thing that really intrigues me, and I haven't looked into it much, but I first saw an ad on social media, and then like somebody was talking about it at work, and so I'm paying attention. AI tools for email management. Yeah.
So yeah, I haven't done anything with that yet, but the tool that I saw come up was Superhuman. Some of it's creepy, but useful, where it's like you can give it a prompt of like, oh, hey, tell Catherine I would love to meet her for coffee and do it nicely. And then it'll like write it in, like it learns your tone, not a human's tone, your tone, and it'll have this lovely email for Catherine inviting her to coffee, but all I was like, hey, computer, do this, please. So I don't know, it scares me a little bit. Some of it scares me a little bit, but the email management part of it is exciting.
Just following up on that.
Yeah.
I know, right? Sorry. Valerie and I, we should have driven up together. We could talk about this in the car.
Yeah.
Following up on that though, from me, like, are you willing to be responsible for an email that you don't know what it says? Well, you sound like you're intrigued, so, yeah.
I'm intrigued, but I don't know if I'm willing.
I mean, that is a good point, right? Like where they'll, are we gonna approach that line where we're stop paying attention, you know, right? And we're depending so much or becoming so comfortable with it that we're not vetting it. I mean, email management's good. I think some institutions are already using it to create newsletters or news posts, right? Which is pretty good. Things like that, where it's organizing information, I see pretty immediately starting to use that kind of thing. There's a future where we may see a like chatbot kind of situation where it's pulling in information from the available resource, so that if you have a question, instead of having to do all the digging, the artificial intelligence will do so and will provide an answer with the collective information from the site that you're on or the sites that are available. Proposal checklists, that would be awesome. Even entering standard institutional information, right, which we see a little bit of already. Yeah, it could be good, but I am also a little bit cautious as well.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I don't know if you all are technology people, but there's the early adopters and the late adopters. I'm after the late adopters. It's usually the late adopters that force me into using it. So even talking about this at this point for me is a huge win, because I am just getting into it and I'm trying desperately to not be afraid of it. And I think, to your point, I think that's why we have to keep humans involved, is so that, you know, it can generate the email for me, but I'm still going to do that double check. What Sarah, I think, is pointing to, I think, is what we're all afraid of. And it's what AI can do that we don't know it can do. And if we start to rely on it and we're not double checking it, then what happens? And for me, AI overall, that's my biggest fear with it, is equitability and access, and what the machine is learning, what data, what perspective is it coming from? So it's a really, for me, it's a little scary, sticky subject, especially as a research administrator, because you all know there are lots of things that AI can do, but we are the human component. We are essential to the process. And so I think drawing that line between using AI and depending on AI is really going to be important to think about.
Yeah. I think it speaks to what Howard brought up, is then who's responsible, right? Where does that lie? And that's I mean, look, we're in the compliance game here, right? So when we're talking about who's responsible, we're not going to be able to pin it on a robot. All right, well, so we've got now, I think, the remaining 15 minutes just for Q&A. And, oh, I am so sorry. We have one more thing.
Just to wrap up something. So NSF actually talked about AI at their webinar. They are taking this very seriously. The good thing is that I'm hearing the same message that I'm delivering, that yes, it may be great, but no, it's not going to replace humans. So even at the sponsor level, they're looking at it. But they have put policies in place to be able to use it. So One of the other examples that we had was assessing complexity based on balancing workloads. So if we could say, you know, this person's working on an R1 and this person's working on an R21, what does that workload look like so that we can equitably manage that? That's something else that that was really cool. Gene Feldman, I'm gonna quote Gene. Generative AI and the merit review process. I think this is probably the first place that PIs are really scared of AI. Who is reviewing things, right? So in December of 2023, NSF issued a notice to the research community about safeguarding the integrity and development and evaluation of proposals in the merit review process. This memo established guidelines for the research community and the important part in the policy, describing just how generative AI systems have a great potential to support us in the US National Science Foundation mission and to promote the progress of science. So she's recognizing, you know, I kind of my late adopter thing, eventually I'm going to be forced into doing this. So I may as well deal with it now. So while NSF continues to support advances in this new technology, we have considered the potential risks posed by it. The agency can't protect non-public information disclosed to a third-party generative AI and being recorded and shared. The safeguard, to safeguard the integrity and development and evaluation of proposals and the merit review process, the memo established guidelines for reviewers and proposers. So use of generative AI by reviewers and NSF reviewers are prohibited from uploading content from proposals. They are not allowed to use it at all. Thank goodness, we're all sigh of relief, right? Proposers are encouraged to indicate in the project description the extent to which, if any, generative AI technology was used to develop their proposal. So if the PI is using, then they must disclose it. And so again, we're back to that disclosures and certifications. We're really depending on the PI to be honest about what they're doing. Ooh, that's a good question. That's a really good question. And so in the NSF, so I'm sorry. Yeah, can you repeat your question?
Sure. My question was just if that includes if central office or admin staff would be using AI tools.
That's a good question. So in the webinar, it's funny because it's almost all RAs that go, but it's faculty focused. So my assumption would be the proposer as the PI. But that's a really good question. And I can get into that and see if I can find a better answer. Yeah. There will be more guidance ultimately issued. So they're not done with this. They are just recognizing this is a thing that we're going to have to deal with, particularly in the proposal preparation space. But this was NSF's first step into this space. She was very clear, like we're developing policies about it, but this is going to evolve. There's going to be more changes. There's going to be more guidelines. And so I thought it was really interesting that a federal sponsor was already talking about policies based on AI. So that's what I wanted to add. Let's open it up. Anybody talk about anything? What are your hot topics?
AI may not replace managers, but the managers that use AI will replace the managers that do not.
Yes. Very insightful. Thank you for that. And hence my stepping into learning about AI. What else? What are hot topics that we didn't mention that are hot topics for you that maybe you wish that we had brought up here or you thought maybe we would talk about? What's hot topics for you all? Zoom folks, you can chime in too, please. Yeah. All right. that's safe and inclusive plan? Has anyone had challenges with NSF safe and inclusive plans? So those are usually my best example, because I used to work with one, was an investigator that worked on a ship 6 months out of the year. And so that was one of the places that we had to develop it. But I've not had any challenges, and I actually moved on from the department, so I don't know kind of what happened with that. What about you all? Is that something that you're struggling with, or?
So this is Erin again from U of A. So a lot of the faculty I support do field work. And they're funded by NSF, so they're writing these plans. And the biggest challenge I'm facing is that they're kind of at a loss because it's not a proposal requirement. NSF's not going to see it unless it's specifically required in the solicitation. So they don't know how much detail to go into, so they're sort of at a loss as to depth of content, what should all include. So we give them the best guidance that we can based on the PAPPG, and give them some boilerplate about the university specific policy, and ask them to add their project specific details. But that's the biggest challenge I've found so far.
Great, thank you. Anybody else? Yeah, Howard?
I figured that out. Thanks, Sherry. This is Howard again from Arizona State. So this is not a policy question, but it is a hot topic. And for us, I know we're doing well, but I know that some places have had some issues, and there's been some spillover that we've been helping with. But as far as a hot topic, what are people doing? And is there still an issue with telecommute and trying to get people to work remote? I know that there are different staff positions that in Teachers College and elsewhere that people have had candidates that they wanted to bring in for interviews. And when they found out it was not 100% remote, those people removed themselves from consideration. So just a topic to discuss. If anybody has any other ideas or what you're doing, if you're offering 100% remote, if you're having issues with new people that are candidates for positions that are not want to be considered anymore. Because I know it's an issue that for people that are trying to recruit at ASU for different positions.
So I'm also from ASU, to be fair, but can you just repeat what you said? There's something that I wanted to add on. So no, no. So essentially, how are we dealing with trying to find candidates in this new remote work environment? And it has been a challenge, especially at ASU, because it's not necessarily a university policy. There are university policies regarding it, but the way that it's actually administered unit to unit is different. And so for my college, we've had a discussion with the dean, and we've identified certain positions that we think can be fully remote, those that can be hybrid, and those that we think need to be in person. Spoiler alert, there's not really a whole lot of in-person actually needed. But I think the opportunities like this, getting to meet with colleagues, getting to meet with folks in the unit is also really important. What we've done is we've posted jobs and mentioned the option of remote work and sort of seen what the candidates' expectations was. And so we kind of deal with that as far as negotiating and things like that. We have reposted the same job posting probably 5 or 6 times. And so that is something that I know for us internally, remote work is something that people are considering for retention. So that's how we're sort of.
Yeah, so Malcolm from ASU, I know within research operations, we've been really lucky with our flexibility. Some of that is because during the pandemic, we outgrew our space. So we don't actually have enough places for people to sit and be in the office at the same time. However, I know, I hardly see the Sarahs anymore. However, like knowledge enterprise wide, because so many of the labs are under the knowledge enterprise purview, a lot of those staff that have to be in person to use equipment, some of the conversations, and it actually is happening through our employee experience or employee engagement arm of our HR, is what flexibilities can be provided for people that have to come in person because it makes like, we're not gonna let you have like dangerous chemicals at your house, you know, like it makes sense why you're here. So what flexibilities can be provided? And I will say, one of the things we've talked about is like, so how did NAU get their True Blue Fridays over the summer? And just really looking at if there is that in-person component, a lot of remote work isn't about working from home, but the flexibility you have by working from home. So even if there is in person, what are some other ways that you can afford the flexibility? And what kind of flexibility do the individuals really care about? Like some people, a lot of people are torn about being in person with people to build those relationships versus being at home. So it might not be like full remote or not. It's like, what other flexibilities, be it, could 410s be possible? We do have a couple of, not many, but a couple of people across research operations that do 410s. Could, like, I forget what it's called, but the 9-8 or the 8-9s where you work 9 hours and get every other day, one day off every pay period. So every other week you get it. Like, could some of those flexibilities maybe, if you can't offer full-time remote, is there something else that you haven't discussed with these candidates yet that might keep them in the pool?
Thank you. So we're just about out of time. I'm getting the 4-minute signal. So we're gonna go ahead and wrap up. I just wanted to say, obviously, I work from home. I'm 100% remote. So I'm a big fan of it. And I had a really hard time understanding leadership's problem with it. And I got someone from HR, their perspective, and then it made me think, oh, because I'm opening a whole can of worms. She said, what if you get hurt in your home office while you're on the clock at ASU? How does workman comp plan that? I don't have that answer. I certainly don't want to figure out the process. So that's just the other side of the coin. So building the bridge between all of the knowledge and getting to the processes. That's that.